I am Sujan R. Chinoy, the Director General of the Manohar Parrikar Institute for Defence Studies and Analysis. And I have great pleasure in welcoming you all today to our webinar, which has been arranged in tandem and cooperation with the Confederation of Indian Industry. And the topic today is building a stronger partnership with Africa. I have a couple of small housekeeping jobs to announce. The first of which is that all non-speakers may kindly and voluntarily mute their mics until they are invited to speak. That will help avoid any kind of static or disturbance in the course of this seminar. The second point is that most unfortunately, the Secretary Economic Relations, Shri Rahul Chhabra, will take some time to join us because he's experiencing some technical hitches in terms of the connection. So I have been advised to commence with our proceedings today and also to go on to make my own opening remarks, and thereafter I will skip Mr. Rahul Chhabra for the moment and turn straight away to His Excellency Mr. Alem Sehaye Woldemariam, the Ambassador of Eritrea and Dean of the Group of African Heads of Mission in India. At this moment, I take this opportunity to extend a very warm welcome to him, as also to Her Excellency Miss Jainaba Jagne, the High Commissioner of Gambia, who has also joined us as one of our panelists today. We have also with us Mr. Chandrajit Banerjee, and I extend to him a very warm welcome. He is the Director General of the Confederation of Indian Industry. From the participants, when I looked at the box a while ago, I did spot a couple of our own High Commissioners in Africa who have spared their valuable time to join us, and I extend a warm welcome to them. There may be more than two, but the ones that I noticed were our High Commissioners to Nigeria and Tanzania, that is to say, Mr. Abhay Thakur and Mr. Sanjeev Kohli. I extend a warm welcome to them. It is really very encouraging to see that they are taking interest in this webinar as well. Ms. Ruchita Berry, who is on the screen, is also well known to you. She is the Senior Research Associate and Coordinator of the Africa LAC and UN Center at our institute. With these words, I have great pleasure in making my opening remarks. It gives me great pleasure to welcome you all to today's webinar hosted by the Manohar Parrikar Institute for Defence Studies and Analysis in association with the CII. My institute has a long history of contributing to India-Africa ties, which stand completely transformed in the last few years under the dynamic leadership of Prime Minister Mr. Narendra Modi. The MP-IDSA, as we are known, hosts an annual Africa Day Roundtable Dialogue to commemorate Africa Day. This year, however, the COVID-19 pandemic has marred the celebrations in India. Africa too has been seriously impacted by the coronavirus. It is therefore very pertinent that the theme of today's event is building a stronger partnership with Africa as we all look to overcoming the debilitating effects of the pandemic and emerging stronger hand in hand. Historically, India has enjoyed close ties with the African subcontinent. Our ancient maritime trade, driven by the monsoon winds, brought us together. The presence of a vast Indian diaspora in Africa once included a young Mahatma Gandhi who perfected his ideals of truth and nonviolence through years of personal struggle and on behalf of all the people there in South Africa. It is no wonder that the late Nelson Mandela once said, "You gave us Mohandas, we returned him to you as Mahatma Gandhi." Today, the world is undergoing a fundamental transformation. Uncertainty is the only constant. Power, whether economic, political, or military, is fractured. Trade and technology have been weaponized. Developmental finance is being used by some countries for strategic ends. Nationalism regionalism and multi-alignment are the order of the day. Traditional and non-traditional security challenges have grown in magnitude. The specter of piracy, radical ideologies and terrorism, especially cross-border terrorism, cast a long shadow on peace and progress, including in Africa. COVID-19 has struck the fragile international compact a very big blow. The pandemic has exposed flaws in multilateral structures and highlighted the lacuna in national capacities, particularly in the field of healthcare. Multilateralism has suffered retrenchment and limited a global response to the pandemic. Most worryingly, the global economy is headed towards an impending recession. Like India, Africa too has been severely affected by the pandemic. The World Bank's Africa Pulse has assessed that COVID-19 has sparked off the sub-Saharan Africa region's first recession in 25 years. A large number of African countries are facing a health and an economic crisis. The steep decline in commodity prices has spelled disaster for many African economies. Precarious fiscal positions have ruled out any major governmental stimulus. Public debt has mounted. Yet, despite these difficult times, there are multiple opportunities for India and Africa to work together on the basis of our common interests. India has already dispatched medical assistance to 25 African countries, or perhaps more than that. Both Prime Minister Modi and Minister of External Affairs, Dr. S. Jaishankar, have reached out to their respective counterparts to reiterate India's support in these difficult times. India continues to be a reliable development partner for Africa. Our partnership remains anchored in the principles of equality, mutual respect, and mutual benefit, with direction for all the capacity building programs that we have in place, driven by African priorities. Africa is one of India's biggest partners for lines of credit as well as the ITEC program. Peace and security are a key priority for both India and all the African countries. India is a key participant in UN peacekeeping in various conflict zones in Africa. India has launched several initiatives to develop closer ties. This year, the first ever India-Africa Defense Ministers Conclave was held in February on the margins of the Defense Expo 2020. Friends, the concept of the Indo-Pacific, which underscores the importance of treating the two great oceans, the Pacific Ocean and the Indian Ocean, as one seamless strategic space, binds us together. It binds India and Africa in a closer embrace. I'm confident that the perspectives that emerge today will help us strengthen our ties with Africa in these difficult times. I was supposed to say that I now request Mr. Rahul Chhabra, Secretary Economic Relations, to deliver the keynote address, but as I informed you earlier, he is, I'm told, still not with us. He is expected to join us.
Sorry to disturb you, sir. Sorry to disturb you, sir. I think he joined us.
He has. That is most heartening to know. So therefore, I wish to end my own remarks with acknowledgement of the presence of all of you here this afternoon. And I now request Mr. Rahul Chhabra, Secretary Economic Relations in the Ministry of External Affairs, to deliver his keynote address. Thank you very much. Mr. Rahul Chhabra, the floor is yours. Please take the best of 15 minutes that we have allocated to you. And I give you the floor.
You can hear me, sir? You can see me?
Yes. I can hear you. I am not able to see you as yet.
Okay, sir.
Perhaps you have to unmute yourself because the sign says there is a muted sign on the camera in the computer.
Sorry, sir. I think this
Your mic is on.
mic is on. Okay,
Yes.
sir. I think there's something. So, sir.
No problems. Please proceed. The floor is yours. We can hear you. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. So it really is a very special day for me. It's just been this been my first week actually in office. So I'm glad to be here. I apologize for this technical mix-up, which is still going on and not being able to be resolved since you still can't see me. But sure we'll get to see each other face to face. But I'm very nostalgic talking about Africa since I've just returned from Nairobi and I had a great experience there. So I think this is a very nice beginning to my stay here. I'll start by referring to what Prime Minister said about India, Africa, that Africa will be at the top of our priorities. We will continue to intensify and deepen our engagement with Africa. And this was said in Uganda a year and a half back. And since then, the partnership has just grown. I will assure everyone who's on that we will maintain a very strong focus on strengthening and growing this multifaceted relationship in my new role as Secretary Economic Relations. In 3 parts. I'll start considering our chief host, the Institute of Defense Studies and Analysis. I'll sort of start by focusing on our defense and security engagements with Africa. That'll be only fair. I'll then go on to the current crisis and talk about what role India has played in Africa and the current crisis. And then move on to the third and final part of my presentation, which will be at our engagement at a macro level and look at the way forward. So to the first part, of course, again, I begin by setting the tone. Prime Minister mentioned at that same event, we will strengthen our cooperation and mutual capabilities in combating terrorism and extremism, keeping our cyberspace safe and secure, and supporting the UN in advancing and keeping peace. It is clear that India and Africa share challenges against these issues: extremism, maritime security issues, gun running, drug, human trafficking. So an environment of peace and stability, as we all know, is a critical must for nations to grow. So that's what we are going to be focusing on in the first part of that how are we contributing towards trying to maintain this peace and security in this part of the world. The bonds between our two continents, as all of us are aware, go back several centuries. I'll not be touching upon those linkages. But we are trying to build a contemporary relationship on the strong foundation of these spiritual, cultural, and civilizational bonds. We are happy to note a new change that has taken place is that Africa is itself taking firm steps to fight terrorism and ensure that terrorism does not disrupt their social fabric and their development. So they have realized the importance of this. Our engagement with Africa in this field goes back several decades. I'll just pick up on our engagement with Nigeria to just highlight. Began right after the independence in 1960. We set up the National Defense Academy in Nigeria at Kaduna, the Naval College at Port Harcourt, other military establishments, elite military establishments. Several Nigerian officers have been trained in the Indian military institutions. Former Nigerian presidents have been trained in India. So it goes back a long time and is continuing. We also signed the Defense Cooperation Agreement in 2007. We've been contributing to the UN peacekeeping operations around there. It's a very forward-looking engagement with Nigeria, as an example, including areas of counterterrorism, counterinsurgency, and sea piracy. So there's lots of fields that we have with Nigeria. It's not only Nigeria, of course. This I just picked up as an example. It extends Pan-Africa, setting up, as example, some of them were covered in the Nigerian context, setting up defense academies and colleges in Ethiopia and Tanzania, deployed training teams in many countries, including Botswana, Namibia, Uganda, Lesotho, Zambia, Mauritius, Seychelles, Tanzania, goodwill ship visits, defense equipment, defense training, Indian Defense Forces in HADR operations, including the cyclone in Mozambique, evacuating stranded persons from 41 countries in Djibouti in 2018. The Africa-India field training exercises in March 2019. which was a joint training exercise with 17 African countries. So that's sort of the Pan-African context of this aspect that we're talking about. We participated in almost all UN peacekeeping operations in Africa, committed to continue our collaboration in these fields, including conflict prevention, resolution, management, and peace building through exchange of expertise and training. The role of women in peacekeeping, we have enhanced their role and playing a big role in the propagating the culture of peace. We have also agreed to continue to collaborate through exchange of experts and in post-conflict reconstruction in Africa. So all these areas have been covered. I'll quickly now just come to maritime security, which to harness the blue economy effectively is again a must in these times. So in that field of maritime security, Prime Minister has said that the blue chakra or the wheel in India's national flag represents the potential of the blue revolution or the ocean economy. So India is engaged in these subjects with Africa in the fora, as many of us are aware, IORA, IONS, IOTC, IPOI, and we want to live up to the name of SAGAR, the security and growth for all in the region. So we've just become an observer in the IOC. So this is the maritime security part of it. So while we have MOUs on defense cooperation with many African countries, including Kenya, Mozambique, Tanzania, Seychelles, we also undertake cooperation in several other areas like training of African naval personnel, hydrographic surveys, and helping African nations, the littoral nations, develop capabilities in hydrography. Anti-piracy patrols, some of us are aware, the Gulf of Aden and Horn of Africa, we've had an Indian naval ship there since 2008, non-stop deployment right there. The ships deployed off the east coast of Africa on a mission-based philosophy for joint EEZ surveillance, port visits again, monitoring stations. So this sort of cooperation is just likely to grow further in breadth and depth. I'll quickly touch upon the recent Africa Defense Ministers Conclave in Lucknow, where we had the Lucknow Declaration. Over 154 delegates from Africa, 14 defense ministers and members of 8 permanent secretaries and people from 38 African countries. So that was the collaboration there. So as a conclusion on this part, I think we are going to deepen our cooperation here, but where the co-host comes into this picture is the role of the CII and Indian industry. I mean, we have opened up opportunities in several of these fields by our initial push. And now we really would like to see industry step in to take it forward, this relationship. So this is where I think they sort of fit in: spares, maintenance, provision of defense equipment, digital defense. So all that sort of defense software. So that's the part about where they come in. I'll go on to silence the guns, creating a conducive conditions for African development. That is AU's theme for the year. And this vision is, again, in sync with what we are trying to do to achieve these goals. At this stage, I'll just pause and quickly look at our overall relationship with Africa, the macro part with the current context. The African priorities are our priorities, as PM has again said. So COVID has really brought in a lot of disturbance, completely disturbed the entire African continent, particularly that we are talking about, because their capacities are limited. They don't have those sort of resources to throw at the disease, at the virus. So these countries are mostly LDC countries with high public debt, over 6%. They have balance of payment strains. They are looking at a sort of loss in quantitative terms of $37 billion to $79 billion of projected decline in their GDP. That's 2% to 5%, sort of. That's the forecast as of now. Further going to be exacerbated with the decline in the international commodity prices. Demand for exports is going to go down. Foreign exchange reserves is going to create a problem. So we have responded. What have we done for the COVID with Africa? Prime Minister spoke telephonically to the President of South Africa, the President of the AU, the Chair of the AU. He spoke to the heads of state, heads of government of Uganda, Ethiopia, several other leaders. External Affairs Minister Dr. Jaishankar spoke to many leaders. These were very reassuring calls. I mean, all these countries felt very reassured by these calls. We provided medicines to over 32 countries in Africa, including medicines that have been banned. covering hydroxychloroquine. We've organized webinars for healthcare professionals, including doctors and paramedics. That's been very popular, by the way. There's these sort of webinars. Many people have logged in to see what India brings to this table on this COVID. We've also decided to further the G20 summit commitment regarding requests for waiver of sort of interest payments and to at least 5 friendly African countries. So that's been directly on the COVID engagement. But the overall broad engagement, we've had a political engagement with 29 countries, African countries, where we have had an intensification with visits, with 29 visits to African countries by our top leadership. Over 41 heads of state, heads of government came for IFS 3 here. We have had over 6 of the 18 missions have been opened up. This sort of engagement goes up not only in the bilateral level, there's a regional and continental level, including at the regional economic communities. So that engagement is picking up. Just now, to tell you about trade, it had increased over tenfold between 2001 and 2014 to reach virtually 70 billion US dollars. But now with the end of the commodity super cycle, there is a sort of decline, but India is still the third largest export destination. We are the fifth largest investor in Africa with over $54 billion. Huge investments in several sectors that I think all of us know about, so I'll not repeat it. I'll just pick up on pharmaceuticals, where we hosted the India-Africa Health Sciences Meet in 2015. Our hospital groups, large groups have come in there. Apollo, Fortis are on the ground in many countries. Dr. Agarwal's eye clinic is again across several countries. I'm not taking names to save time. The new field that we are looking at is trilateral cooperation, where with Kenya, we're looking with Japan to set up a cancer center there in Kenya. In Ethiopia, we're talking with the UAE for a center for IT excellence. So that's a new sort of field, including using the IPSA fund, USAID, the DFID-funded CETA program. So there's a lot of that. I'll now go on to the lines of credit. Over 181 lines of credit, 41 countries. Africa is the second largest recipient of India's overseas assistance, getting close to $11 billion. So just again, small aside, we just inaugurated a few months back a factory on the line of credit from Exim Bank, Rivatex, meant to be a textile factory. But now it's whole time producing masks. So it's really meeting the COVID requirements and is being completely transformed. So the Kenyans are extremely glad for this contribution of the Indian government to their industrialization and having this facility now available. So our development cooperation is really touching upon power projects, dam projects, Sudan and Rwanda, water treatment in Tanzania, sugar factories in Ethiopia, IT parks in Mozambique and Swaziland, SMEs in Kenya, SEZs in Rwanda, healthcare systems across Africa, presidential palace in Ghana, National Assembly building in Gambia. So you see the range, it's there. Capacity building, 50,000 scholarships to Africans, announced just 5 years back, and we have already done over 45,000. We have announced that we will bridge the digital divide. So we have this E-Arogya Bharati and the E-Vidya Bharati, 5 years of free tele-education to 4,000 students, medical education to 1,000 doctors. Several countries have already signed on and the project has been launched. We've also set up 7 vocational training centers in Ethiopia, Rwanda, Burundi, Burkina Faso, Gambia, Zimbabwe, Egypt, technology center in Zimbabwe, entrepreneurship centers, India-Africa Institute for Foreign Trade, English language training centers. I mean, I could just go on, the entire webinar could be all this, so I don't want to keep listing it out. Coming pretty much to the next part, 13 current or former presidents, prime ministers and vice presidents have actually studied in India, trained in India. So that's really a big sort of plus that we have. 6 current or former chiefs of armed forces in Africa have been trained in Indian military institutions. So political leadership, defense leadership, so pretty much the top gamut have had their training in India. They've actually come and seen India, therefore. We have offered $10 billion in development projects in the India-Africa Forum Summit, grant assistance of over $600 million. This has been used up, the entire grant assistance. The lines of credit are quite close to being used up. So that's good. And across, Coming to people ties, we have 15 festivals of India that were held in Africa in the last 4 years. 12 were held for the first time ever. We have had e-visa facility for 33 African countries. The Suraj Kund Crafts Mela now has been increasing the scope. Over 36 African countries have participated in the fair, shows their interest in coming here. So we have already a lot going on, but there's still a long way to go because we need to move on from this government to government contacts to now business. And I'm glad therefore CII is part of this, media, civil society. So we need to sort of expand the scope in that sense. So now we come to sort of the next steps, the last part of my presentation where Africa fits in. How we fit in with Africa's Vision 2063. Solar energy is absolutely critical. And that's where we need to sort of get in. We are getting in with the International Solar Alliance. More than half the members are African countries. So we will be working on that. This e-ITech program, along with e-Arogya Bharati and e-Vidya Bharati, is again another way we are trying to bridge the digital divide. Traditional medicines is another area where we could work. The blue economy, we mentioned that along with the maritime security issue. Trilateral cooperation. What I didn't touch upon earlier was study in India. That's another very interesting part. While I was in Nairobi just before I left, Gujarat State came with a delegation to present just Gujarat State. And within a day and a half, they had hundreds of Kenyan kids who had signed up to come and study in Gujarat. So study in India, I mean, if every state picks up maybe a country or two in Africa and sort of focuses on it, that may be a good way of going about it. Women empowerment, again, our 40% of our ITech slots have been utilized by women. So we are looking at, that the first all-female police unit of the UN was set up in Liberia. So that way we are promoting a lot of women empowerment. In the maritime space, port visits, deployment of ships, increasing engagement with the eastern coast of Africa under the DCOC, with the island states under the IOC, information sharing domain, capacity building in shipyard building. Now again, L&T and all that sort of industry fits in here. So basically it's academic institutions, think tanks, and of course the youth to sort of take on the role where we have brought it up to. And I, as the nodal point here, stand fully ready to facilitate any movement in this direction. I thank you all for listening. I apologize again for this late technical start. And I thank the Manohar Parrikar Institute of Defense Studies and Analysis for giving me an opportunity to share my thoughts on this critical topic. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much, Mr. Rahul Chhabra, for your very, very informative and wide-ranging remarks that have thrown a great deal of light on how you envisage our partnership with Africa. I'm very happy to note that you also touched upon defense and security issues, and particularly the reference that you made to post-conflict reconstruction. I suppose at this stage, the focus is going to shift on post-COVID-19 reconstruction of sorts. I also wanted to inform all participants that the Defense Expo 2020, which you have just heard the Secretary ER mentioning that it was a very successful event insofar as African participation was concerned, actually was something that was organized by the Ministry of Defense in partnership with my institute. So we were a partner institute in organizing that event for the African nations and others as well. On trilateral cooperation, I think a reference must be made to Japan, which has its own TICAD program. And there is a tandem and cooperation that's visible and possible between India and Japan. And especially because there are some shared values and reference points also on which we can work together. Tele-education is something that the Secretary said is very important. And I believe that virtually every large educational institution in India, especially the universities, should actually formulate and organize a special tele-education course for African students. I mentioned this in a previous webinar as well. And I really quite like the idea that he gave us of states in India also linking up with various African countries. So I think that's a very good concept, and I hope this will be successful. At this stage, I would like to turn to His Excellency Mr. Alem Sehaye Woldemariam. I already introduced you, Your Excellency, Ambassador of Eritrea and Dean of the group of African heads of mission in India. So the floor is yours. And I also want to remind everyone that this event today is being organized in partnership with CII. And so once again, I place on record that fact that we are doing it as a tandem. I'm so happy to see my friend there, Mr. Chandrajit Banerjee. I also request all participants at this stage to use the Q&A box. There is a black circle towards the right side of the bottom of your screen, which says more options when you bring the cursor onto it. And when you click on it, you will see at the top, there is a Q&A box. So might I suggest that you all send in your questions through the Q&A box and not through the chat box, please. And I will then endeavor to, at the end of this, to pass on all those questions to the best of my ability. I turn to you, the Ambassador of Eritrea, please. The floor is yours. You have about 10 minutes, please. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you very much for giving me this opportunity. Mr. Rahul Chhabra, the new Secretary of Economic Relations, I congratulate you with this opportunity. Mr. Chinoy, Director General, IDSA. Mr. Banerjee, CII Director General. My sister, Her Excellency, Ms. Jainaba, High Commissioner of Gambia, and Madam Ruchita, the Senior Research Association at the Coordinator Africa at the IDSA. Excellencies, distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen. First of all, I wish to express my sincere thanks and appreciation to the Manohar Parrikar Institute of Defense Studies and Analysis for the invitation extended to me to be part of this webinar on building a stronger partnership with Africa, being organized by the Institute in collaboration with the Confederation of Indian Industry, CII. I would like to take this opportunity to congratulate also personally His Excellency Ambassador Rahul Chhabra for his recent designation as the new Secretary Economic Relations at the Indian Ministry of External Affairs. I wish Your Excellency all the best in this new mission, which will certainly extend your contact and interaction with all the African countries. It may be recalled that this session comes on exactly a year after the Institute hosted a round table on 29th May 2019 on the theme India-Africa Partnership in a Changing World, which was also an occasion to commemorate the 2019 Africa Day celebration in India. In my capacity as the Dean of the Group of African Heads of Missions in India, and on behalf of my African colleagues in New Delhi, I would like to say that it is highly appreciated to see once again our Indian partners commemorating the Africa Day 2020 in a moment when the whole world is mostly taken by the COVID-19 pandemic. Excellencies, distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen, as it has been rightly alluded to by the speakers before me, the relation between India and Africa go back to a few decades, that is, before the independence of both India and African countries. Perhaps what provide a natural synergy for building partnership between India and Africa over the years are their commonalities in rich natural resources, similar demography, and large domestic markets. It is therefore not surprising that there are more than 3 million Indians and or peoples of Indian descent residing in Africa. I must remind you here that the respected Indian independence leader Mahatma Gandhi Ji began his non-violent civil rights activities on the soil of Africa before returning to India in the early 20th century to galvanize the civil disobedience activities for India's independence. Indeed, the collaboration between Africa and India in the struggles against colonialism and all forms of inequalities in the world over the years are well known and documented. Today, the India-Africa relationship is more dynamic and multifaceted, with a partnership which is prioritizing mutual and beneficial development and prosperity. Moreover, the relation between the two parties have witnessed a turning point since the launch of the first edition of the India-Africa Forum Summit in 2008 in New Delhi. This initiative has elevated the Indian-Africa partnership to high horizons and the new scopes of cooperation, where India has proven to be as a serious and credible partner to the African countries. In this regard, I would like to recall with high appreciation the 10 guiding principles of India's engagement towards Africa as unveiled by His Excellency the Prime Minister Narendra Modi in his address to the Ugandan Parliament in 2018, during which he stated that Africa will be at the top of India's priorities, and the development of India-Africa partnership will be guided by Africa's priorities. Furthermore, in preparation of the fourth Indian-African Forum Summit, the two sides held a midterm review meeting on from 11 to 12 September 2019 to identify the progress, shortcomings, and challenges emanating from the implementation of the framework for strategic cooperation reached during the third Forum Summit held in October 2015. It is in this light that we should see the significance of this webinar, which should be for us to exchange on the path for India-Africa relations to follow in the future. Excellencies, distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen, the COVID-19 pandemic imposes itself in any discussions nowadays. Like the other continents, Africa has been also affected by this pandemic. Till yesterday, there were more than 330,000 confirmed cases, more than 160,000 recovered patients, and nearly 9,000 deaths. Comparing these numbers to the data coming from the other continents, they look acceptable, but it does not necessarily mean that Africa is safe or that COVID-19 has been well contained there. However, what is sure is that the situation could become very critical if the virus starts spreading forcibly in Africa. Like elsewhere, especially that most of the African countries suffer from inadequate or poor medical equipment, personnel and health infrastructure, as well as from financial resources. Being aware of the huge gap between what we need and what we actually have, and in order to overcome these deficiencies and to properly combat COVID-19, the African Union has launched the Africa COVID-19 Response Fund to mobilize and manage different financial resources, including from the private sector and other stakeholders. Excellencies, distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen. However, it is a source of satisfaction to note that few countries in Africa are doing great in fighting COVID-19. Some of them have already surpassed a recovery rate of 80%. Others have maintained for weeks a mortality rate of less than 3%, a mortality rate. Furthermore, we have noticed a few days ago a remarkable intra-African cooperation when some of the African countries have shown a high level of solidarity by sending medical aids to other countries of the continents and also to the Commission of the African Union. I cannot miss this opportunity to highlight the ability of Africans to turn challenges into opportunities. In many African countries, medical devices and equipment have been locally manufactured and by Africans themselves, mainly ventilators and preventive protective equipment. Also, believe me when I say that few non-African nations, mainly from Europe, have imported masks from African countries where self-sufficiency has been ensured. such is the case of Morocco, which has been able to reach a manufacturing capacity of more than 10 million units daily of different kinds of masks of protection. Excellencies, distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen, during this global pandemic, the cooperation between India and Africa is called to be more effective by focusing on few specific areas. Before in some of these areas, I would like to thank India for being the pharmacy of the world during this pandemic and for assisting many countries from Africa with medicines and medical equipment, either on grant basis or special export permissions for medicines. I'm also aware that the requests of many African countries for the urgent importation from India of preventive protective equipment and life-saving medications such as hydroxychloroquine have been approved by the government of India. Yet other requests are pending. As a world leader and a historic champion in combating pandemics, India is invited to assist its African partners that are in real need and at the same time encouraging and learning from the initiatives of the others who are innovating new ways in countering this pandemic. Indeed, the transfer of relevant technologies between India and Africa, the exchange of data, statistics, experiences in managing the COVID-19 crisis, as well as increasing the use of telemedicine is today more important than anything else. In addition, the Indian pharmaceutical companies investing in Africa are invited to play a bigger role in helping the African countries to fight against the spread of this deadly virus and build their own capacities. Obviously, COVID-19 has and is adversely affecting the finances of all African countries. I will therefore suggest that India relaxes servicing schedules of the line of credit and buyers facilities extended to African countries in view of the situation. India can also announce a debt cancellation or suspension initiative towards some least developed African countries during these hard times. In my view, the foregoing is the least support that India can extend to African countries in the spirit of India-Africa partnership during the period of this pandemic, even as we work towards the fourth India-Africa Forum Summit. Excellencies, distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen, beyond the pandemic, there are still great opportunities available in Africa for India in the spirit of the India-Africa partnership. As many may be aware, a new fact is emerging with the potential to defragment Africa and boost the productivity of its economies. The African Continental Free Trade Africa, one of the flagship programs and projects of the African Union Agenda 2063, intended to help in significantly accelerating growth of intra-Africa trade and so use trade more effectively as an engine of growth and sustainable development through doubling of intra-Africa trade by 2022, strengthen Africa's common voice and policy space in global trade negotiations, and establish the financial institution within agreed upon time frames. Expectedly, the Africa Continental Free Trade Africa will create a single market for goods, services, and the movement of the persons in order to deepen the economic integration of the African continent. The fact remains that the economies of India and Africa represents two of the world's most dynamic economic growth stories. As has been widely reported, by 2030, Africa will represent almost a quarter of the world's workforce and consumerism. With 54 countries, 1 billion people, a youthful demographic, and an abundance of resources, Africa will carry our planet's hopes and responsibilities. I urge, for that matter, India, through its industrialists and other business establishments and the executives, to consider relocating some of their activities and production lines to Africa in order to enjoy the enormous opportunities that will emerge, including duty-free and quota-free accesses when the Africa continental freight trade Africa fully takes off. On this score, I wish to remind us of the proposal made by the then Indian Minister for Commerce and Industry and Aviation, Mr. Suresh Prabhu, during his address at the 14th CII Exim Indian African Conclave on India-Africa project partnerships in March 2019, that India and Africa should work together towards entering into a free trade agreement or a preferential trade agreement to strengthen their economic relationship. For a start, India should consider signing more bilateral investment promotion agreements to give their prospective private sector operators confidence to undertake more foreign direct investment in order to take advantage of the enormous potential and real benefits that will come up with the implementation of the African Continental Free Trade Africa. Excellencies, distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen, we have noticed that every country is struggling to eradicate its pandemic within its own borders, making use of their own capacities. But shouldn't we think that the post-COVID era needs more attention from and more cooperation between all of us? I believe that in the post-COVID time, Africa will need more substantive investments and more co-development initiatives, and not necessarily ad hoc assistance and gestures, which unfortunately does not help much Africa reach its self-reliance and own independence on the country. It only increases its independence on the others. In this regard, and on behalf of my colleagues, I invite India to focus more on development programs in Africa, to look at the advantages the continent offers in terms of its natural resources valuation by launching joint ventures, engaging new joint initiatives with the leading African countries for the benefit and the development of the continent. It is also important to rethink the goals and the instruments of the Indian African Forum Summit and match them as much as possible with the goals of the African Union Agenda 2063, namely in flagship areas like health, agriculture, education, technology, science, infrastructure, peace and security, and innovation. Before concluding, I would like to say that India is well placed among all the existing different development forums to have a more important place and role to play in Africa owing to the respect it enjoys throughout the continent. At this juncture, let me take the opportunity to express my sincere appreciation to the government of India for the varied support they are giving to the African missions and African nationals across the country during their difficult period. Kudos to all health workers and other essential services providers for the wonderful job they are doing to fight this rather mysterious disease. As we say in Africa, this too shall pass. Long live in the Africa Partnership. I thank you all for your attention.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much, indeed, Ambassador Woldemariam, for your very, very comprehensive remarks and for that broad overview again that you gave us on the future of our partnership. I could add one more to your list of potential areas for cooperation, and that is on anti-piracy operations as the threat shifts from the Gulf of Aden, where we have worked together with the international community, to the Gulf of Guinea. There's some more that India and African countries can do together to deal with that menace. Before I turn to my next speaker, I also want to remind all participants at this stage to kindly use the Q&A box to put in your questions if you have any. I see a number there. And I also request all the panelists to kindly take a peek into that box, Q&A box, so that you're prepared for those questions. I now turn to Shri Chandrajit Banerjee, Director General of the Confederation of Indian Industry, to deliver his remarks. And may I request and remind all other participants, the panelists especially, who are not speaking, to kindly mute their mics. Thank you. The floor is yours, Mr. Chandrajit Banerjee.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Thank you very much, the session chairman, Ambassador Sujan Chinoy. Thank you very much. It was great to listen to Mr. Rahul Chhabra, Secretary ER, at this forum. Greetings to you, Mr. Chhabra. Greetings also to Excellency, the Dean of the African Heads of Missions to India, the Ambassador of Eritrea, Ambassador Shri Woldemariam. It was nice also listening to you. Very, very informative indeed. I must also acknowledge the presence of the High Commissioner of Gambia, Her Excellency, Madam Jainaba Jagne. Great to see you, Dr. Ruchita Berry, Excellencies, High Commissioners, Ambassadors, ladies and gentlemen. Warm greetings from the CII, and it is really great to have this opportunity to interact with our friends from Africa on this very important occasion today, the Africa Day. Together, we are indeed very, very honored and delighted to partner the Manohar Parrikar Institute of Defense Studies and Analysis, led by Ambassador Sujan Chinoy. Real thanks to Ambassador Chinoy for inviting the CII to partner this important webinar. For CII, Africa is indeed very, very special. And today we are meeting, as we heard from some of our speakers, at a very difficult period of time in the world. The World Bank's Africa Pulse, I saw that recently assessed the COVID-19 outbreak, sparked off the sub-Saharan Africa's first recession in 25 years. India's economy too will not be remaining immune to the global trends that we see, the recessionary trends, although we are seeing return to normalcy as far as our economic activities are concerned. And amidst this, it is indeed heartening to be a part of a positive story, the story of India and Africa. And India and Africa, as we have heard today, and as we all know, share a phenomenal history of culture, economics, political interactions, rooted deeply in the spirit of developing together as equals. And I really like to reiterate that the India-African economic engagement is indeed on an upward trajectory, and the immense natural resources, the rising middle class, the growing workforce of Africa, and also, of course, India, give us a unique edge at a time the advanced nations are grappling with increased aging populations, as we all know. So the African Continental Free Trade Agreement, which again we'd heard a little bit about, which would come into force very, very soon, will really drive deeper and broader bilateral trade and investment ties, and everyone feels confident on that. And as we know, that the trade between India and Africa has really increased almost 10 times in 2018-19, which in turn is almost more than 11% increase over the bilateral trade of the previous year. Although in 2019-20 there has been a slight decline owing to lower commodity prices, I believe that this once the continental free trade regime comes into effect, we will see a substantial surge in trade. And with the cumulative investments today of over 50, in fact around 54 billion, India is definitely the fifth largest investor in Africa, and this can also be expected to increase with the AfCFTA. And in the address to the Ugandan Parliament, and as Mr. Rahul Chhabra was mentioning in July 18, our Prime Minister really outlined those 10 guiding principles of India's engagement with Africa as the basis of a long-term relationship, and we draw a lot from that in terms of from the industry side, and that's really also amplified and demonstrates that Africa is the top priority of our government's foreign policy, and it makes a lot of sense for Indian businesses also to prioritize Africa, given that. And India today has built a strong developmental agenda in Africa during the duty-free tariff preferential scheme, lines of credit, as we also heard, and energy cooperation through the International Solar Alliance. And as again mentioned by Ambassador Sujan Chinoy, in the last 1 month, India has really dispatched medical cooperation to 25 African countries, and our Prime Minister even having had talks with several African leaders, as we have heard, and this is, all of this been very closely seen and rather followed by the Indian business. And therefore, what CII has done is to, in this 3 months, I would say, re-strategize a lot towards deepening our engagements towards Africa. Actually, if I may say, CII began its Africa-focused engagements nearly 30 years ago. And today we are linked with 95 counterpart organizations in 41 countries, as well as local and multilateral bodies to connect Indian and African industry. And our engagements and activities from the industry side are built around 3 core areas, if one can say: knowledge sharing and skill development, capacity building. The second, the trade and investment promotion, and the third, of course, the policy and the multilateral engagements. And I have indeed great pride in stating that the CII annual, the India-Africa Conclave on Project Partnership has been instrumental in reinforcing the diverse India-Africa developmental ties. It's unfortunate that we are unable to hold this conclave this year physically. We had to postpone it in March. And we are looking forward to hosting this sometimes by the virtual mechanism. And I also really wanted to underline that since 2005, over 14 editions of the conclave, almost 15,000 Indian and African delegates participated in the knowledge and the business sessions, the B2B sessions to discuss. Today we have clocked in over 4,000 bilateral projects. So when we do this conclave, the virtual conclave this year, we are expecting a greater participation from not only across both regions, but also from other countries, which would be keen to work with India with Africa on a tripartite model. So we are also organizing now for the last some time regional conclaves with the support of the Ministry of External Affairs across Africa, and as well as besides the regional conclave, some multi-sectoral business delegations and participation at some key exhibition in Africa. So this is again a new and a key development which we have started, and we are very keen to further deepen this in the years to come. And in addition, we also are running the Industrial Services Training Program with the support again of the Ministry of External Affairs for capacity building. That said, I believe we have only touched the tip of an iceberg from the industry side again. There is enormous potential for deepening and broadening the India-Africa trade, investment and development relations. Today, the Secretary ER mentioned many opportunities. And what is important today, not only for India and Africa, but really for the entire global community, that we are able to deepen this. I'd like to really now talk about very quickly on 5 key areas of cooperation as I leave this meeting today that we believe can help realizing some of this potential. First is the healthcare part. And again, we heard a bit about it. This would be a very important area for greater collaboration. In pharmaceuticals, India has the mark with the highest quality and cost-effective treatment and generic pharma. I would really look forward to having Indian companies considering setting up API manufacturing in Africa. So that's something that we will be focusing on. Second, on the ICT and the ITES, growth opportunities really stem from the fact that from the Africa's thrust on e-governance, development of new banking platforms, industry-specific IT solutions, and so on and so forth. And since the movement of African students to India for higher education has been disrupted, now India may expand the e-Vidya Bharati, the tele-education project, to establish an India-Africa virtual university. The third part is on industrial development, which is another important area where Indian companies could participate in a much bigger way. We are working on that, and we look forward to taking that forward also very strongly. The transportation and the power sectors in Africa, they really present huge opportunities. Fourth, in terms of energy, we are aware that the two regions can really collaborate a lot on efficient technology solutions, such as solar biomass and solar wind hybrids and other similar areas. The International Solar Alliance, of course, provides a very, very important platform. And finally, agriculture and some of the related products, including fertilizers, farm equipments, sugar refineries, and R&D in agricultural techniques. These can be major areas of cooperation between the two regions. And Indian companies can definitely take advantage of the various preferential trade agreements most African countries have signed with US, Europe, and other leading economies. And closing, I'd really like to underline the supreme importance of building bridges between the youth of India as well as the youth of Africa. India and Africa together, as we were hearing, 35% of the world's population, the majority of which are today young. Let us galvanize strong linkages between our people, encourage our youth to be the ambassadors of the India-Africa partnership, and also undertake joint entrepreneurial and developmental ventures. I am personally very, very hopeful that the deliberations at this particular webinar will set the stage for a new, lots of new ideas actually for furthering the India-Africa partnership, especially on the business front from where I come from, to scale new peaks and set new examples in the realm of South-South cooperation. Once again, thank you very much for this opportunity.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chandrajit Banerjee, for those very helpful remarks and for making those recommendations, which will help us to forge an even deeper partnership, trade and economic partnership with Africa. Thank you again. I now turn to Her Excellency Ms. Jainaba Jagne, High Commissioner of Gambia, to deliver her kind remarks. The floor is yours.
Thank you. Good afternoon. During the test discussion, I was told that there was an echo from my end, but I hope everyone can hear me properly. The videos are not on, so I'm not sure if people are nodding or not. Anyway, I shall proceed, and I join my team in thanking the Manohar Parrikar Institute for Defense Studies and Analysis and the Confederation of Indian Industry for organizing this work. And appreciation to my colleagues for nominating me to speak on this occasion.
Sorry to interrupt you, Your Excellency. Could you speak a little closer to the mic, perhaps? Because quite apart from the echo, we are losing a bit of the sound itself. As in, yeah, could you just move a little? Thank you.
Is that better now?
Yes, I think it's a little better. Yes, let's give it a shot. Thank you.
I also join my team welcoming Ambassador Rahul Chhabra as the new Secretary of Economic Relations to MEA. I have no doubt that under your stewardship, Ambassador, the ties and bonds between India and Africa will be tightened and strengthened. I was also happy to observe that you served in the land of my father, Senegal. And I'm not sure if the ambassador is still there, but I would say Bangladesh. I don't know whether you still remember sending as well. And it's exciting because Africa is highly supportive of Indians who reside in our lands. And speaking of which, I take this opportunity to congratulate India on its election as the non-permanent of the United Nations Security Council. I can hear the there's still too much echo.
Yes, indeed, there is a bit of an echo. I think the solution would lie, if you don't mind my mentioning this, in actually drawing very close to your laptop. I think you're using a laptop. And so perhaps just bring it quite close to yourself, and then let's give it another try. We can hear you, but it's some snatches here and there with a bit of echo as well. So, but we are all ears, and there's a full 70 of us, very keenly listening in. So let's just give it a shot and try again with in close proximity to the laptop.
Is this better?
Yes, it appears to me to be much better than before.
But now, Mr. Moderation, the problem with being the last speaker is usually that all that is to be said has already been said.
Don't worry,
And,
it's now perfectly all right. Go ahead.
The previous speakers have already eloquently spoken of ways for India and Africa to build stronger partnerships and have given concrete areas of collaboration. As such, I will just quickly say a few words in summarization of what they have already said, which is slightly repetitive, but important nonetheless. So the African continent and the subcontinent of India have had a long historical interaction, marked by cultural, economic, and political exchanges based on the principle of South-South cooperation. Greater awareness has been raised about the significance of Africa in the global arena on issues relating to security, peace, climate change, and sustainable development, aspirations which India is also committed to. There are few partnerships that are as significant as the one between Africa and India. This special relationship has witnessed a phenomenal growth in terms of cooperation and interaction at the highest levels over the past decade. India entered into a structured engagement with African countries with the launch of the first India-Africa Forum Summit held in New Delhi in 2008, followed by the IAFS in Addis Ababa in 2011, which marked a turning point in the relations between the two giant economies. The third India-Africa Forum Summit, which was held in New Delhi in 2015, renewed the focus of India on strengthening the partnership with African countries. Dean, I can see you gesturing. Still a problem?
What is happening?
Dean, you'll also have to mute your mic, Dean, if you don't mind. Thank you.
Okay.
Please do mute your mic. Yes, go ahead, please. We can hear you. High Commissioner Jagne, please go ahead. We can hear you much better than before. Stay close to your laptop, and we are getting the message. So please go ahead. Please continue.
Okay, excellent. So apart from the increased engagement on the political front in recent years, India has undertaken significant initiatives to strengthen its development cooperation with African countries, especially in priority areas such as trade and investment, skills and capacity building, energy, agriculture, health, and infrastructure. The India-Africa partnership is fundamental for global prosperity, as India has become one of the fastest growing economies in the world. Africa is also going through rapid growth and development and houses 5 of the 10 fastest growing economies in the world, according to NASDAQ. India's bilateral trade with Africa has grown at an exponential rate over the years. In 1991, bilateral trade was at about $1 billion, and today it's over $63 billion. Despite the huge success registered over the last decade, it is of note that India's trade with African countries is not even spread yet, and that's an area where the partnership is strengthened to be mutually beneficial. I'm certain that Director General Shri people from FICCI and other chambers of commerce will work with us closely on this. The Indian government has extended grants and lines of credit to countries in Africa for the development aspirations in priority sectors like infrastructure, energy, agriculture, and their subsectors. India has also supported capacity building through ICCR, IJEC, IASF for long and short-term programs, and launched initiatives such as the Public-Private Partnership Training Programs for educational and medical professionals of Africa, the Pan-Africa E-Vidya Bharati and E-Ariga, am I pronouncing this right? Ariga Bharati Network Project, amongst others. Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, fortunately, the COVID-19 pandemic has affected the development aspirations and growth trajectories of India and Africa. It would be difficult to predict the exact scale of the economic and social consequences due to the pandemic, but it is likely that most countries, especially in Africa, may face severe recession. These are challenging times all over the world. The global economic activities are expected to go down this year due to the pandemic. As more start to open up the economies, trade will start to resume, but it will be at a slow pace for now until such a time that the crisis is over. It is therefore a wake-up call for countries to reprioritize their development agendas and strengthen their economies to survive this pandemic and any other crisis in the future. The current crisis has highlighted the need for access to e-services, e-governance, and e-commerce, and the consequent requirement of energy in our everyday lives, especially in the areas of public services and healthcare. The pandemic has demonstrated the need for closer collaboration between India and Africa, especially in the area of energy, agriculture, and health, as the previous speakers alluded to. An area of collaboration and partnership that can be strengthened now, and even more so after the crisis, is energy. India, through the International Solar Alliance, will have a key role to play in partnering with Africa to undertake solar energy projects that will provide reliable, safe, and clean electricity to hundreds of millions of Africans and Indians who remain up to date. My fellow colleague, high commissioners and ambassadors, COVID-19 has exposed a lot of risks in most of our African countries, especially the over-reliance on the import of food commodities and so on. Post-COVID, a lot of African countries will seek to collaborate with India to pursue food self-sufficiency projects and programs, as India has achieved this with a population of over 1.3 billion people, thus showcasing to Africa that it can be done with our population of 1.3 billion people too. Africa has the land, the manpower, and the political will, but what is now required is the financing and the expertise to industrialize agriculture in Africa. Business community private investments, public-private partnerships, lines of credit, and grants will go a long way in ensuring that African countries grow what they eat and eat what they grow. Excellencies and ladies and gentlemen, the audience, the other speakers have articulated the need to strengthen collaboration in all aspects of the health sector and have cited the augmented medical diplomacy witnessed in India during this pandemic. Therefore, I will not reiterate and dwell on that. But all I would emphasize is the need for closer collaboration in our digital health economies, increased joint research of genetic mapping, use of artificial intelligence in modeling and predicting spread diseases, augmentation of digital infrastructure required for healthcare, and so on and so forth. The digital age we're about to enter can be used to build bridges between our youth, who are confident and much more comfortable in that sphere, more than some of us BBCs in the Gambia, as we call them, want for computers. Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, in conclusion, India and Africa need to build on the strong base which already exists between the two of us, and both need to promote the very pillars on which this partnership is built. Africa has immense opportunities and tremendous potential, and the enhanced there's still room for realizing the full potential of the partnership. As the Dean mentioned earlier, in preparation for the 4th India-Africa Forum Summit, our two sides held a midterm review meeting to identify progress made, shortcomings, and challenges. With these shortcomings and challenges addressed promptly and positively, there is no doubt that with the continued support of the Indian government and all my colleagues here, through this partnership, we will witness an enviable and prosperous India. Most of the information of what I've spoken on and what I've elaborated on can be obtained from prestigious Indian think tanks like Observer Research Foundation, the Vivekananda International Foundation, the Indian Council of World Affairs, amongst others. But Mr. Moderator, before I end and mute my mic, Excellencies, I crave your indulgence and for breaking protocol and taking off my diplomatic hat and putting on my academic hat over here. With my academic hat, I'm always on the lookout for trends and doing some critical analysis of these trends. And speaking from the heart, and quite frankly, I'll oversimplify a little bit of what I'm going to say very quickly. I believe the lockdown of the world has caused by this novel coronavirus has displayed to us that the modus operandi has to change. The world, the entire world, has witnessed a distinct shift in what people are willing to tolerate from each other, and are now not averse to stating these in the strongest terms, sometimes without tact, and worse still, without respect. For those who do not know what I'm talking about, I would suggest just one day of scrolling on Twitter, and you will see some examples. What I would suggest you do, as the last speaker says, DG of CII, we need to strengthen the India-Africa partnership right now and focus on the youth. The new generation, the next generation. The new generation of youth who come from countries that were formerly colonized by the West are wide awake to the underlying level of disdain that is knitted after them. new generation is aware of neocolonial tendencies of some Western countries who refuse, unfortunately, to let go of the so-called, excuse my language, countries. This is a growing trend of the new generation in this information-rich globalized area. Therefore, Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, as long as India and Africa are aware of this newfound confidence in youth, the table can be organized in such a way that it is evident that all voices are heard and ideas are respected and implemented in a mutually beneficial manner. This unfortunate medical crisis we are enduring allows us to explore this new social phenomenon. And we should use it to our advantage to strengthen Africa-India partnership, like the Director General of CII has just said. If we make decisions based on mutual respect and the African philosophy of Ubuntu, the Zulu phrase, basically meaning humanity towards others, combined with the Indian mantra of Vasudeva Kumbhakam, meaning the world is one family, the continent of Africa and the subcontinent of India will be minimized. Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, I thank you for your attention and for commemorating Africa Day with us. I mute my mic.
Okay.
Thank you very much, High Commissioner Jagnev, for those very, very warm words that you expressed. And I can assure you that Vasudeva Kutumbakam for us very much includes Africa, first and foremost. Thank you also for that little wake-up call that you were sounding for all African countries to reprioritize their economies in light of the COVID pandemic, and also asking all of us to strengthen all the pillars of our partnership. So thank you once again. At this stage, we now begin with our Q&A session. There are a few questions, and since many of them are not necessarily addressed to any particular panelist, it is my intention to run through panelists in turn. But before I do that, I will simply read out a few of these questions. Some of you may have seen them, the panelists, some of you may not have. So we have Mr. Najmuddin Lakhal asking a two-part question. One is about the importance of research and innovation, which is vital in his view for progress. And he believes that it's not part of the India-Africa partnership, or perhaps in his view, not adequately part of our partnership. Secondly, he wishes to know the progress on the Asia-Africa Growth Corridor, which was part of the ADB annual meetings in the past, the one hosted by India in May 2017 in particular. I think that part of the question can be best commented on by Mr. Chandrajit Banerjee, and perhaps before him by Secretary Rahul Chhabra, if he wishes to take that question. There is Ambassador Debnath Shaw, who is asking about African Free Trade Agreement and what is the current situation and how has COVID affected the process. Ambassador Rajiv Bhatia asks Secretary Rahul Chhabra, what is the current thinking about holding the next India-Africa Forum Summit, the fourth one? If it is a physical summit, if we cannot have a physical summit, is it not possible for us to convene a virtual summit as soon as possible? Is this likely to happen in 2020? We have Mr. Mahesh Arora speaking of a connect with the new generation in Africa. He believes that the connect with the new generation and the youth has dimmed. It is not as robust as it ought to be. And he believes this is after the departure of legends like Mr. Nelson Mandela, Julius Nyerere, Kenneth Kaunda, etc. So the next generation of leaders, and assuming that they are also youthful leaders, how does India plan to connect itself with the African youth? There's a similar question again from Najmuddin Lakhal about connect with African youth. Mr. Lal Ganju simply takes the opportunity to thank everybody. Well, thank you, Mr. Lal Ganju. Commodore Roby Thomas is a naval officer serving with our institute currently on loan, says CSRS networks are the cheapest solution for ensuring coastal security and boosting the blue economy. Will the African Union partner with India for installing the same in its littorals to fulfill the African integrated maritime strategy? So that is having a coastal security radar system. That's what he means by CSRS, for those that don't know the acronym. So we've done this with some island nations in the Indian Ocean, like the Maldives, for instance, with Sri Lanka and some other island nations as well. Would the African nations be ready to do a coastal security radar system in tandem with India? What else do we have here? We have Dr. Uday Bhanu Singh of our institute wants to know what is the level of cooperation between the coast guards of India and West African countries. These are, of course, somewhat technical. Then we have His Excellency Major General Chris Sunday. Welcome, Ambassador, to you as well. High Commissioner of Nigeria. He's here with us. He joined the webinar a few minutes after it started. He's wondering if he could say a word. I don't know how we can do that because this format doesn't support the participation of non-panelists. So I'm afraid, High Commissioner, we'll have to skip it this time. But you're free to put in your comment in the Q&A box, and I'll be happy to pass it on. The point is technical. This format doesn't support the participation of participants other than the panelists. We then have Uday Bhanu Singh again asking about aspirations of African countries in regard to the blue economy. And lastly, again, the irrepressible Mr. Najmuddin Lakhal, his fifth question, I assume here. How can India be a corridor between Africa and Asia? Anyhow, you got the gist of all these questions, broadly speaking. May I begin with our keynote speaker today, Secretary Rahul Chhabra, and he may wish to address one or more of these, and then I will quickly move on to the other speakers. The floor is yours, Mr. Rahul Chhabra.
Thank you so much, sir. I want to begin by just thanking the Dean and High Commissioner Madam Yagne for welcoming me and those warm words. Thank you so much. Quickly, on the Asia-Africa Growth Corridor, it was really supposed to be and is a think tank-led initiative. So it is for the two think tanks involved to sort of put work on proposals and put them up. And we at the Ministry of External Affairs will be very happy to take them forward. So we are awaiting that sort of movement from the think tanks involved, because it was really a track 2, maybe track 1.5 sort of initiative. On technology, he's right. Maybe there, I haven't focused on it, but that's a good point that was mentioned. And I'll definitely look at it, how we can further the relationship at that level, at the R&D and technology level. Regarding the timing of the IAFS, I really haven't had time, Ambassador Bhatia, to it's just been a few days. I've been in office and I was actually preparing for this webinar, which I should have also prepared on that front. I knew this question would be coming up with, but I'll look at it and get back. I don't know what the thinking really is at the ministry on that issue, timing of the next summit. Regarding youth, connecting with the youth, I think most of our missions are extremely active on Twitter, Instagram, Facebook. So I think that's one way in which they are trying to connect with the youth, including in terms of the recently held Yoga Day. I mean, at least I in Nairobi was trying to sort of get it popularized in schools rather than having just the Indian expat community or the Indian local community do it. So I was looking more at sort of the Yoga Day as one of the big activities where we could directly connect with the youth in that sense. I think the rest of the questions are really maybe somebody else could. The CSRS and all is really for the African countries to take on. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much, Shri Rahul Chhabra. I now request Ambassador Woldemariam to address some or most of the queries, those that you're comfortable with. The floor is yours.
Thank you. Well, there are a lot of questions that concerns not to Africa but to India, I think. So, as an
Ambassador,
Africa,
you've been in India long enough. You are, as I see it, an honorary Indian now. So please bat for us as well. Go ahead.
yeah. So, as regards that Mr. Lal Ganju's question about the Navy, the control, what do you call it, CRSES. This one, I really don't know exactly how it is going, how it was formed this, because we never participate as an African in this group. So I think this is, the Indians can respond to this immediately, if possible. If possible. As regards to the youth, we have the African students here. Of course, they are youth and they are students also, and they have very good association. So the Indian youth, they can approach to our African youth, where we have many of them. And they are the name of this association is African what do you call it, Students Association in India, where they graduate every year, and we participate in their graduation. We as missions and as well as Indians are participating there also. So with this, they are in one group. It is better. It is so good to have a good relation between India and the African youth. So they are formed as an association. It is good for them, for the Indians to approach. They have their own president, they are their chairman, they are their own secretary, and so on and so on. They are formed in all the cities, in all Indian cities are there. So I suggest this one. As regard to that of Mr. Nejmeddin, it is all.
Before you go on to that, Ambassador, how about connect with the next generation of leaders? We have seen that in the past with the likes of Mr. Nelson Mandela, with Julius Nyerere. We have seen it with Kenneth Kaunda. And we've also spoken today of a fair number of the current crop of African leaders having some connect with India, possibly with an educational institution or university here. Do you feel we have the same kind of connect now as in the past, or was it on something, more fundamental, like shared values and decolonization and anti-apartheid and truth and justice, and if these things don't exist in the same passionate manner today, does it really take away much of that glue?
Yeah. If you see in terms of numbers of students educated in India and having this big responsibility in Africa, most of them are those who were here long time ago, during the independence, during the struggle against the colonialism and so on. Now, with this new generation, where there are thousands and thousands of students from each country, we don't see much in a higher position in Africa. But before, because of the struggle, they were learning here, and as fighters, or I don't know, as politicians, they were the figures there at that time. So I know many, even Mutharika, the Malawi ambassador, he was here also. In fact, he visited many times after he becomes president. There are many, but this generation, there are too many graduated students from India. But we don't see when they go back to back home to have such kind of position. But in such good positions, they are there. I mean, as a minister is, as a director is, I don't know, as engineer is, and so on and so on. So the new generation, I say, as an African ambassador here in India, I advise the youth to be formed in the form of the governments. I mean, Africa and India, not only the students. So, African Union and India, or African heads of missions in India together, they can organize this kind of associations together. And then where these people, when they go back home after the education here, they will have some good posts in Africa. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Ambassador Woldemariam. I now request Shri Chandrajit Banerjee to say a few words, commenting on these questions and observations. Yes, please. Yes, go ahead.
I have question with. Can I give some questions?
Of course you can ask. So long as you're asking the others. Yes, go ahead.
Okay. This question is to Mr. Banerjee.
Yes, good.
And being here in India for a long period of time, I have been in this CII Exim Bank conclaves every year, of course. So, in all the conclaves passed before, we hear from CII many business has been concluded in millions and billions, of course, some. But we never heard from them, frankly speaking, the next year or in the middle of the year, giving brief about this business concluded. How many of them had been completed and how many of them remained? Why it concluded? So this all
I get the point.
Sorry,
yes.
Sorry to say that I am not accusing you, but we never heard such kind of report from CII.
Well, I'm sure. Yes, yeah, I think you know what really happens is this may require a separate session in itself, but I'm sure in general terms, Mr. Banerjee will be able to take that on as well. So I now turn to Mr. Banerjee. The floor is yours, please.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Ambassador Chinoy. Very quickly, I'll try and touch upon a few points. Of course, one of the things that was in the questions, as I see, which is on the growth corridor. So, as Asia-Africa growth corridor primarily looks at entering or rather partnering also with Japan in doing projects in Africa, and in this, the two countries have met quite a few times, and have identified few sectors like infrastructure, healthcare, and manufacturing. And while the governments have really started engaging in identifying the projects, on the other hand, the private sector has already started discussion between India and Japanese companies, and we are also working together. And as an extension of the third country partnerships, apart from one nation, India has also been working closely with other countries like France, UAE, UK, to partner in various developmental initiatives in Africa on a tripartite model. I also wanted to really touch upon this question, which which has been pointed out about whether on science and technology, and whether African countries can sign S&T, the Science and Technology Agreement, with DST on bilateral industrial R&D program. probably that could, the CII works with the DST. DST is the Department of Science and Technology of the Government of India. So we work closely with the DST to bring Indian industry partners in these programs, and CII can additionally can work with Indian industry and R&D institutions to promote appropriate technologies in African nations. So really look at India-Africa technology sort of a summit as a part of our
Are you satisfied, Mr. Banerjee? Are you satisfied with the level of connect that we have with Africa insofar as R&D and innovation is concerned? Or do you feel yourself that we could do much more?
Huge gap, Ambassador. And I think that's a huge possibility of doing much more. So I really welcome this question and this issue. Even training of African professionals in technology management in India, say, for instance, is another thing. So it's a huge area, and one would like to really work on this. And this is a great point which is coming out of today's meeting. And I think we will deepen the discussions on this so that we can take this forward. And on youth, I just wanted to say one thing. We have a wing within the CII system. We call it Young Indians, YI. And this YI group, through various international, we have various international collaborations. So YI in India, Young Indians have signed collaboration partnerships with, say, for instance, the Commonwealth Youth Forum. So many such youth forums across the world. The young Indians who are a part of the CII, but all youth, young executives, young professionals, young business leaders, we would like to really identify African institutions of our kind and enter into deeper collaborations. And we from CII will be happy to ask the young Indians to go as delegations into Africa and work with these counterpart organizations. And thirdly, Ambassador Walderman, I just wanted to mention, your point is very well taken, very well taken. And while 4,000 odd projects, as I mentioned, have been already concluded, but we will give you a midterm report on this. And as Ambassador Sujan Chinoy very rightly mentioned, this can be a discussion for another day, which we should. But we will take this forward. I appreciate your input on this.
And what about the FTA, the Africa FTA? Would you like to say anything about it? In terms of
yes, of course. So, yes, please. Yes, Ambassador. Well, what has happened is, in fact, from CII, we have been really working with the Government of India, with the Commerce Ministry, to see how we could, because this is again a huge potential of a win-win as we see in this FTA, and we have said that this is something that we would like to really see being acted very quickly, and Indian industry would love to get into this. So this is again an opportunity which we need to really exploit very critically.
But I suppose it will be a while before we can actually get on to doing that, because we'll have to take stock of the yes, kickstarting, restarting of the Indian economy post pandemic once it's under control, and then look externally at that process. Yes, thank you. Those were very useful remarks. I now request High Commissioner Jagne. I also request her to take on that issue of connect with the youth most appropriately, and with the next generation of leaders, if you have any comments on that as well. The floor is yours.
Thank you very much. So the two things I would mention and talk about sort of tie in together. And one is to address Ambassador Excellency Lakal's question about joint collaborations in research and collaboration. I, for one, coming from academia, have a huge respect for the knowledge society that India has. Any top organization around the world, whether you're talking about Google or NASA or Microsoft, the top technicians there are Indians. If you look at the medical field, I lived in the UK for 20 years, and all of my medical practitioners, my GPs, were all Indian. In any sphere of technical work around the world, you'll see the Indians there, and this is partially due to the knowledge society that they have built up themselves. Now, there's not much awareness about this around the world, and I don't know if a lot of people are aware of this, but your IITs in India here, Indian students who cannot have access to those institutions will then go and have access to Massachusetts Institute of Technology, MIT, which is one of the best institutions around the world. And people around the world are not aware of this, the caliber of education that the Indians have on their soil. So I, for one, have focused and prioritized educational collaboration. I think if you speak to anybody in MEA, they will tell you about how often I go there. Initiate joint collaborations in terms of trainings for all levels, students, our top civil servants, our academics in the Gambia, and also going personally from university to university to initiate research and development programs and exchange programs, not just for the students, but also for the lecturers as well. And going back to the aspect about the youth, the Dean has spoken earlier of the youth that we have graduating here and going back and serving their various countries. Perhaps the positions that they're serving aren't as prominent as the ones that you had previously, where you have presidents and prime ministers having studied in India before. But that is the case from our end. Once we graduate from here, it is on the end of and get into these prominent positions and raise awareness about the education that they have in India. And these are the unofficial ambassadors. And now we're having an influx of special envoys and diplomats in every aspect of life now. We have science and technology ambassadors and diplomats. We have medical diplomats. We have economic diplomats. All top organizations now are looking for former ambassadors to serve as special envoys in the organizations. So this is another area where we can strengthen the collaboration between India and Africa. We have a special focus on capacity building, which has already been started, but I think more awareness has to be raised about this. And in higher education institutions, probably starting from the 200th position or so in the higher education league tables around the world, they scored just as greatly as the Western countries in terms of research, in terms of industrial placement, in terms of graduate placement, in terms of teaching. But where they score least is international outlook. So the league table, solely because of international outlook, but yet they're performing just as well as all of the other Western universities who are attracting all of our African students. So awareness needs to be raised about this. We need to initiate some program where we can have more African students coming to universities here, which in turn will lift up Indian universities in the league tables. Yeah, so that's my response.
Thank you. Thank you very much, High Commissioner Jagni.
Very good.
I think that last point was very important to create awareness among the youth in Africa as well. So I think it also requires a bit of hard work and footwork on the part of Indian universities and educational institutions. They have to go out there and promote themselves as well in this very competitive field today. So there's a lot of choice there, and youth everywhere tend to exercise that choice as well. But thank you very much. At this stage, I once again want to place on record my personal thanks to Secretary Rahul Chhabra for having so soon after his assuming charge as Secretary Economic Relations to have joined us this afternoon and to have made those very perceptive remarks and suggestions. We all wish him very well, and I'm sure in the course of the next few years, he will really give a new impetus to our partnership with Africa. I also want to personally thank Dr. Ruchita Berry before she takes over for actually having set this whole thing up, and she and her colleagues in her center. And it will be remiss on my part if I didn't personally thank Mr. Chandrajit Banerjee and the CII. Of course, I thank all the panelists and those panelists that could not, those participants who couldn't speak today. Let me assure you that we will find another opportunity. This is not the last time that we are engaging on the subject of Africa. We'll find you a slot to give your very, very considered remarks as well. With these few words, I now request Ms. Ruchita Berry, Dr. Ruchita Berry, to deliver the closing remarks. Thank you all very much. Dr. Berry, please.
Thank you, sir. Excellencies, esteemed panelists, ladies and gentlemen, good afternoon. So now it's left to me to deliver brief closing remarks. We've been discussing India-Africa partnership, and we all know that India and the countries in the African regions have comparable challenges of creating equitable and sustainable growth, strengthening governance and institutions, and dealing with a similar range of traditional and non-traditional security threats. Therefore, it is quite natural that India and Africa are working towards a mutually beneficial partnership based on the principles of South-South cooperation. India's partnership with Africa is aligned with African development priorities as reflected in African Union's Africa Agenda 2063. Ladies and gentlemen, we are living under unprecedented circumstances. The COVID-19 pandemic, as has been pointed out by the panelists today, brought forth new challenges for Africa and India in terms of ensuring health, livelihood, economic well-being, and security of our respective populations. It is great to note that African countries have launched a robust response, including several innovations and research to tackle the pandemic. In today's webinar, we have discussed and deliberated on the current India-Africa partnership and the ways to strengthen this engagement further. I feel a lot is happening on this front. And as Shri Chhabra, Secretary ER, has pointed out, we have a long way to go. We are today also commemorating Africa Day. And I am reminded of the words of late President Kwame Nkrumah of Ghana. He had visualized Africa as one continent, one people, and one nation. However, the reality is that Africa is not a monolith and represents 54 countries. So for enhancing future engagement, Indian policymakers may have to consider diverse priorities in each region of this continent. And we also need to connect, as has been pointed out by several panelists today, with the people, particularly the youth of Africa. As we come to the end of the meeting, I take this opportunity to thank all those who have made this event possible. First and foremost, I thank you, Shri Rahul Chhabra, Secretary ER-MEA, for taking time out of your busy schedule to deliver the keynote address. I also thank Mr. Chandrajit Banerjee, DG-CII, and Mr. E.B. Rajesh, Regional Director, CII, for collaborating with us in this initiative. I hope we will be able to do similar events in future too. I would also like to thank His Excellency Ambassador Waldemariam of Eritrea, Dean of the African Heads of Missions to India, and Her Excellency Jagne, High Commissioner of the Gambia, for joining us and for their thought-provoking presentations. This webinar would not have been possible without the support of Shri Sujan Chinoy, Director General, MP-IDSA, and I thank him for all the encouragement. Finally, I would like to thank all our esteemed participants, members of the Institute, industry, diplomats, both from India and Africa, for joining us. All the best. Jai Hind. Thank you.
Thank you all very much. Thank you, Dr. Berry. I also want to thank His Excellency, the High Commissioner of Nigeria, and His Excellency, Mr. Najmuddin Lakhal, the Ambassador of Tunisia to India, who had also joined us. And as I said, on another occasion in the future, we do very much hope to have them also come onto the same platform and say a few words. My apologies for not being able to accommodate all participants today on the list of panelists. Once again, thank you all. Stay safe. Good evening.
Thank you, sir. Thank you, Ambassador Chinoy. Thank you, Ruchita. Thank you.
Vinita.